Okay, so one thing that people then get mixed up with over here is when they're doing this, where should they start? How should they actually create this system? Well, it's pretty simple. I normally myself I start with a block because then I kind of understand what it's working with. But you can also start with the back end section. So firstly, what block am I going to do? Now, to understand these blocks, it can get a bit confusing because when you're drawing them, you'll notice that your block may come out as a nice big item, such as this special type of check valve, which I'll show you in a little bit. But when you're actually working with it, if you actually measure a valve normally, you'll normally see valves have got a very specific measurement. And you'll see normally like a valve, if you're looking at it, you can see it's pretty small. It's normally 0.5 high, and then it's normally 1 across, which is very small. Because one thing you have to know is the way the plant works in the back end is it uses the size to scale it nicely. Now, the smaller you draw, the smoother things are going to scale in general. So everything revolves around the scaling. It actually also then jumps into my next point that I've got in my slides here, which if you take a look, is our symbols, blocks, and scaling. Now, this section and the prior section that I was just talking to work hand in hand. And if you take a look at this block that I've got here, which I'll show you in a bit as to how this works, you'll notice there's a few interesting things. Firstly, if you notice the gray background, you may, if you use AutoCAD a lot, be aware that this is inside the block editor. So firstly, I'm going to have to make this thing into a block. And then you'll notice that I've got these two sections on the sides, which is attachment point encode 0, and attachment point to encode 180. So what this means then is that, is that I have to then put this information onto this block. So I've now got this at my right scale. I know offhand that, for instance, this is 1 and that is 0.5. So now I need to make this into a block. So I'm going to go block create, and I'm going to call this whatever the name of this block is. So this is specifically for a valve, but it can be done with almost any section of equipment, and you just have to see as to how it's going to work with that piece of equipment, which I'll go on a little bit about in a second. So firstly, with our block definition. Block definition, so this would be maybe a super check. Firstly, okay, so this is just a random name I came up with, but now in this section over here, you notice I don't have a space, I use an underscore. Plant, if you want to save yourself a lot of gray hairs, plant doesn't really like spaces, so try and use things like underscores or then contract your words together, and you'll save yourself a lot of problems. Some of the things in plant do allow it, some of the things don't allow it, so it's just safer to be safe than sorry. And I'll show you a little trick here with naming things in a second. So firstly, base point, I'm going to specify my geometric center over there. Select my objects. Cool. Now that that is done, I can then quickly do something here, which I'm going to go open in block editor. I'm kind of happy with the rest of it. And go, okay, ready redefined. Redefine, because I was busy experimenting quickly. Always have to make sure things are working first before I make a fool of myself. Okay, so I'm going to quickly bring up my pad. Oh, the reason why I've got this pad, by the way, is because... So give me 1 second. I just need to jump to the correct page because I do a lot of Python programming and I've got so many pages open here I get a little lost. Ha, there's the correct one. Okay, so on my screen over here, this is actually the way that I normally keep notes of stuff. So I've got my Notepad++ open, and then I've got these specific pieces of information. Now, these two sections are kind of very important because this attachment point is how you're telling the line how it's grabbing onto that component, where it's allowed to grab on. Don't get me wrong, you can, if you want to, just create an object with no attachment points on. And what it will do is it will allow any item to then grab directly onto this. But the problem is it's not controlled in any manner. Now, if you're taking a look at these attachment points, you can see, you can actually, firstly, in a lot of places, you can just put attachment point 1 on. or attachment point 2 on it. There's 2, or 3, or 4, how many of you want. This next section over here basically restricts it. So encode 0 is 0 degrees. So let me just quickly put this on and I'll show you. I like copy pasting because it kind of helps reduce error. What I do is I use the point over here and I'll put a point on one of the ends. Number of grips, leave it as 1, enter, and it just says position 1. I'm going to do the same thing with the opposite side. Enter. So now I've got 2 point parameters. That's as simple as you need to do. Don't worry about it like that. I'm going to show you now how we actually modify these to work with us. I'm going to select the position 1, right-click, and go into its properties. Now, you'll notice in the position name, it says position 1, this is where we will put our encode. Now, if you left it as just attachment point 1, it will create a slight issue, which may be an issue, may not be an issue. It's to do with the joints, how it actually attaches, which I'll show you a little bit later what I'm talking about. That would happen if you don't put the encode on. With this encode, we're forcing it that this is the 0 degrees. So when it joins onto something, it knows that this is where it's coming in from. Cool. And when I click off it, I hit escape, you notice the text is over there. I'm going to go to number 2 and do the same thing. But of course, I can't use attachment point 1. I have to say it's 2, and this is at 180 degrees. Oops, 180 degrees. So one thing you just want to be aware of is that AutoCAD, remember, rotates counterclockwise. So in other words, we start at 0, 90, 180, 270. So if we wanted to, I could put another one over here, number of grips 1, and then change this to, could say this one was actually 2, and that would be 90 degrees, and then I'd have to change this to 3. But I'm not interested in doing this because this is just a check valve type system. So what this is now done is, because remember this is going to be a check valve, it's got a flow orientation. So it can only flow in one direction here. And this is part of the reason why it's critical that we make sure that we've got these encodes, because encode, this is our inlet, 0, flowing to point 2, 180. Simple so far. I'm going to go close and save the super check valve. Yay! Now if I click on it, you can see it's in a block, but you can't actually see those little attachment points. Now, for those of you familiar with this, you may have realized that that is very similar, and in fact it's using the same tools as how we create a dynamic block. Unfortunately, dynamic blocks do not work in Plant P&ID yet. Hopefully it will be included in future. The one slightest exception is with off-page connectors, which I'll mention a little bit later. That is part of one of the things we're going to go to. They can be a bit tricky to get right, but they can work for you once you know what you're doing. Okay, that being said, so now that we've got our check valve, this is the block section done. So this is what we're going to see in the front end. But now the thing is, how do we get this into the back end? How do we actually make this work with our project? It's actually quite simple, because all you need to do here is go into our project setup itself, which you can either do from using the drop-down at the project manager, go project setup, or my normal way of doing it, I'll right-click on the project and go project setup. Cool. Now we just wait one eternity. Okay, I've got an NVMe SSD drive, meaning it's really fast. If you've still got a hard drive, this thing can take forever to open up. Just be patient. Don't start randomly clicking around, because you can start making it confused and cause unreliable issues that may pop up. So once this is done, now what you'd want to do is navigate to the correct area. So as you can see, my nodes were expanded there. If it's not, you just have to find the piece of equipment this is going into. I know, for instance, this is going to my hand valves, but if it was another piece of equipment, I'd have to go, okay, P&ID settings, what does it fall under? In connection, line setting, what, not interested. P&ID class definitions. Now, I just know this because I do it quite often, but you may need to do a bit of digging to find your way around. But just try and be logical about it, and you should be able to find what you're looking for. Engineering items, equipment, inline assets. Cool, it has to be an inline asset. And then in hand valves. Pro information for you, by the way. People get confused between piping fittings and piping specialty items. Think of it like this way. Piping fittings would be all your basic fittings like elbows, tees, like stuff that will be in any specific plant, no matter what. I mean, it's your basic building blocks. Piping specialty items would be more like a specialty thing that goes in there. Think about like filters, blinds, anything like that would go into it. In fact, if you open it, you can actually give a bit of an idea as to what is inside here and what you can use. It just gives you an idea of what to put where. Whereas if you open up the pipe fittings, it's your more, like I said, stock standard item that you would have in almost any plant. There are also differences, and people don't like piping specialty items because out the box they don't sometimes have the tag, but they did add that in the 2020 release, I think it was. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, because that means it probably hasn't affected you. In the hand valves, we're going to add our new valve in here. So if I expand my hand valve, I've got all these valves. But what I'm going to do here to add in my new valve, I'm going to right-click on the hand valves and go New. Now, it's going to ask me for the class name and the display name of the class. Now, as I'm typing in this one, so I'm going to say super underscore check. If I left that as a blank space, it would kick up an error. Watch. So if I left that actually as a blank space and I go OK, class name can only have letters, numbers, and underscores. Okay, cool. So underscore. That's preventing us or trying to stop us from making a mistake. But there's a little trick here. What you can do is once you filled in the class name, you notice it automatically fills in the display name. What you can do is come down here to the bottom one, and you can actually put a space in the display name. Because it's not intelligent, it's just pulling the information. It's just showing you what it is. It is as a descriptor. We can have that space there. And when we click OK, cool, that's done. Now we've got the beginnings of our back end in. So what we've done is we've gone into the hand valves and then placed our new hand valve in. But this is only part of the thing what we need to do. We now have to tell it, okay, I need to then somehow put this block in here. And then I'd go add symbols, and then I'd browse to this current drawing sheet. But there's one important mistake that I've made here. Because now, if you're aware, I'm just going to click OK for now. If you're aware how blocks work, once I've created this block, I didn't do something here which is critical, is I didn't save, because you need to save to write this block into the back end. Now, I've seen this numerous times that people don't do this. It's, why is this thing not working? Because you haven't saved. Because you've been so focused on working on this, you didn't save, and this creates the issue. So it hasn't written that block into the back end. So before I do that, I'm just going to hit save. Now that my drawing is saved, I'm going to go back into my project setup. And you notice my super check is still there. If it's not on, or if you clicked on something else, no issues. Just browse back to where you put the information in. Or if you, unlike what I've just done, you've done straight off the bat correctly, cool, 100%. I'm going to click on my super check, and now I'm going to add in the symbol. So over here, I'm going to click Add Symbols. I'm going to use the Browse button, and I'm going to browse to where my drawing is. You notice even gives me a little view as to where I currently was when I saved the drawing on my thumbnail. I'm going to click Open, and as you can see, yes, I got so many other things in here. But I know what its name is. Super Check. And click Add. Nice little preview, and Next. The next bit of information is basically some symbol details inside it. So what we'd be seeing in any system. In this case, I think it's, okay, let me start at the top. I'm just going to copy my name from the top, super check. Current layer, I think this one is mechanical if I'm not mistaken. Mechanical. So this is its default information, how it's going to be put in. You can always override this later on if you want, but it's generally better to use its default info as to whatever else is in the class. If you do get lost as to what needs to go in here, what you need to do is come to one of these other valves or other pieces of equipment and see what information it has in here. You can also always change this a little bit later on, and I'll show you that in a second. So color, I'm just going to set it to bilayer and bar block. I know what these are off by heart because I do this quite often. So symbol scale, watch this. I'm going to leave this as 1, and I'll show you that in a second, what I mean by we can then use the others to check it. Scale on insert, no. So basically, if this was a tank or something, you could say that to yes, and then you could define how it's going to insert. Because a tank, then you could elongate, you can make it thin and tall, short and fat, or however you want, especially if you change the scaling mode. Tagging prompt, yes, we want to automatically assign a tag. So what this is going to do is as soon as we pop it in, it's going to automatically generate a tag, and we don't have to tag it ourselves. Or you can set prompt for tag during component creation. So this is going to ask you, hey, I don't know what needs to go in here, but you need to put something in here. Or otherwise, not a tag component. So by the way, if you are running into a problem where a component should be tagged, just not showing any tag when you right-click on it, that's probably because it hasn't been set as a, well, it has been set, should I say, as a not tagged component. So all you need to do is come in here and then modify that. Join type, inline, yes. Auto nozzle, no. Okay, don't worry about that for now. I'm going to click finish. So now once you've done that, it then populates all this information in here. Now what I meant by checking the information, that if I click on one of these others, I'm just going to find one that's, there we go, so plug valve. And if I go edit symbol on the plug valve, I can then see what information is in here. And you can see, oh look, the symbol scale is actually 10. I'm just going to copy that, edit symbol scale, and then paste it in there. So now I know that my symbol scale is going to be the same. So why is this important? Is that because we want to try and make our symbols all the same size. Or else it's going to look a bit strange. If you've got one symbol massive, one symbol small, etc., it's going to be a bit problematic. And also, where this also becomes problematic, and this is to do with the symbol scaling, which is a bit important, is because if you get the symbol scale wrong on one of these or anywhere else, it may impact further down the line. For instance, if you get the symbol scale incorrect on one of your valves, it could be that when you're putting your end connections on, so let's say your flanges, sockets, etc., these don't scale properly, and you'll end up with your end connection looking really small or really big, depending on how you've messed around with this. So that's why one of the temptations with a lot of people when they start implementing this is they'll try and change everything to a scale 1:1, which if you're willing to go through the entire system and then change it to work like that, then cool. But you're going to be doing a lot of rework. It's just a little bit easier to do it this way around. Plus, also, like I said, for certain things, it helps with that smoothness or that scaling. Because if something is smaller and as you're stepping up to the scaling, it doesn't want to go up there. There we go. Yeah, you can lift it up like that if you want. Cool. So, like I said, if you do want to change anything in these symbols, you can click Edit Symbol, and this is the information. Not to be confused with the Edit Block. Edit Block will then jump back into the block creating panel and edit it. There's one thing I'm going to show you when we get to the end connections, but you notice this little guy over here, the assign formats. That we'll get to in a sec. Just wanted you to be aware of this little guy floating out. Don't try and dismiss him or get rid of him now. He's actually pretty important. You can get him back if you do, so don't worry if you don't. But most importantly, notice my attachment point 1, encode 0, and my attachment point encode 180. Don't worry too much about the little exclamation marks. They are not going to be bothering us at the moment. I'm going to click Close Block Editor. Cool. Now we've got our basics down, where we can now actually work with this piece of information. But one little thing I want to do here is scroll all the way down to the bottom. So this, as you can see, is our symbol information itself. If you've got multiple symbols, by the way, you can add multiple symbols in here and then use the drop-down to select what is its active symbol. For now, though, I'm going to click Add to Tool Palette, and it's going to say Added it to Tool Palette. Now, my Tool Palette is currently actually minimized to the side over here because it's in hard mode, but it has populated there, and I'll show you that when we get there. But beforehand, let's look at these properties. Now, these properties over here is literally the back-end information. This is the important part as to what is actually going to look in and what the information is going to pull out when you're using our manager. So this is also why I keep telling people, think of Plant3D as more of a database system. And these are our fields, how it's pulling the information, what information it's pulling through. Pro tip, if you want the information to actually be visible in your data manager, that is what you can use this visibility in your fields over here for, what is actually being shown or not. I'll come back to this in a sec, but firstly, what we want to do is scroll all the way down, and we are looking for has flow direction. You can also resize the columns if you want. Has flow direction, false. Nope, we want this to be true. Because remember, we set it to automatically now have our flow direction set. You can also change your valve tag if you want, and you can add that in. A little bit more about that later. Okay, now that I've got everything done, I have made my symbol, sorry, my block that I made with all the tagging, all the information inside it. I've done the back end now, and then I've added all the symbol information in. Cool. Now what I can do is hit OK. And if I come to one of my little lines, if I expand my tool palette, you can actually see it's been added to my tool palette. If you've done like what I've done, it's like, oh no, I've put this thing in the wrong place. There's no need to worry. You can always move it around by right-clicking on it. You can cut it off, and then you can actually jump to another piece of your palette and then paste it in if you wanted to. I'm going to cut mine off and then put it back to where it was, because it technically is a valve. So I was lucky I did have it in the right place in this case. Now, when I click on it, I can then place it into my drawing. Now watch this. As soon as I drop it in, as you can see, it has already numbered it correctly. It's chopped the line, it's done everything like it would, and what do you know? Can you see the sizing is even correct? Now remember, the sizing I took it from was that small size over there. So this is showing you as to how the scales are starting to play together. But now, wait, there's more. Because remember, this thing had a flow direction. Notice the flow arrow. If I were to select it, right-click and say, wait a second, let us reverse the flow, notice the little arrow reverses. Because we've told it that you have a flow direction. So this is how you can actually use it to control your system and how it works. By the way, if you're doing reducers, it works exactly the same way. So pro tip on reducers, if you do have a reducer and you're drawing one, make sure, I know this is sounding really strange, but make sure that the large side is when you're actually creating the block is on the left-hand side and the small side is on the right-hand side when you're first creating the block. For some reason, I've noticed this does create issues in the back end, and it's going to make your life a bit of a difficulty if you don't do that. Cool. That being said, that is kind of like the basics of what we're looking for, or how we would create one of these blocks and make it stable and work in a predictable fashion. So with that being said, now how can we take this a bit further is if we look at something like our connectors. So if I jump back to here now. So if we're taking a look at something like our connectors now, and you take a look at the bottom, I've purposely done this with, whoops, excuse me, let me go back one. I've purposely shown you guys the default connector because it can show you as to how complex these things can begin. And this is kind of, like I said, the bit of an exception in the rule about dynamic blocks, but I honestly wouldn't suggest going into this level of detail because it confuses me sometimes, actually, so not such a great thing. You can have a lot of information in things like your connectors, etc. You'll also notice that it's got the attachment point 1 and attachment point 2, but it doesn't have the encodes on it because of the way that they work. But don't worry about that, more than in a sec. So with this, with our connectors, we can then also pull information across sheets from our project lines wherever we want actually in the project as long as it's been listed. We can actually do, we can make these things quite complex also if you wanted to, but generally I prefer to go the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid, because the more information you're putting into this, the more difficult it can be to try and get them to work correctly. You can get them to work correctly, don't get me wrong, but it's just your amount of effort that is going to go in to try and get these things correct or working in a predictable fashion can be quite considerable unless you know exactly what you're doing. This is a cool little trick, is about this equal symbol. Now, I'll show you guys this in a bit, but now when we're working with these, it doesn't auto-populate this equal symbol. What the equal symbol actually means is it refers to not your current drawing, or not your current what you're looking at, but whatever it's referencing to or from. So this is what the silver equal guy is about, and I'll show you about that when I quickly show you as to how these things come about. Also, if we are using custom properties, and I know I've said this multiple times, but don't put spaces in. This will give you an absolute nightmare of trying to get things correct, is if you're putting a space. Now you'll actually see this one over here. This one I created was just a test, and I had this drawing ID field that I actually created in the back end of actually working with when I was referring back into the project setup. I'll show you that in a sec. And what this drawing ID did is it was just an ID for the specific drawing sheet wherever in the project. Now the problem is that if you leave these blank over here, it gives you an error when you're trying to populate these, or when you're trying to put this equal sign in. So if you're trying to re-edit it, it gives major issues. But without further ado, like I said, I don't want to give you a death by PowerPoint. Let us jump back into the actual drawing itself. Now I've already got this set up over here. It's my little dummy I've created. So I've drawn this thing 1:1 because that's basically what the information I want. Now, when we are wanting to convert now a off-page connector now into a block or working with this, it works a little bit differently because of the text, but these text items are actually attributes. So if you've ever worked with attributes before, 100% you're well on your way. What a lot of people will also do, and this is the original off-page connector at the top here, is they will take this and then they will just reuse this information. Which there's nothing wrong with it, but I prefer to start clean and afresh. But that's just my own way of working. If the other way of working for you works 100%, then that's good for you. In this case, I've got 2 lines of text. I've created dummy text 1 and a dummy text 2 inside my nice geometry. Now, firstly, okay, I know what the scale needs to be. I know what the sizing is, but I'm going to have to, I've drawn this, I've created my attributes, and now I have to get this thing to scale. Because remember, it's going to scale down here, but then it's going to be rescaled back up inside the symbols. So what I'm going to do is use my scale command. I'm going to scale these down. And I know it is a 1:25 scale that is going to scale up by just because I know what the scale is. But in this case, I know it's going to be to a scale of 0.04, which makes it tiny. But now what we do is we need to block this. I'm going to go create block. I'm going to say OPC 001. Specify a base point. Let's put that as a base point. Select the objects. Select all my objects. Cool. Now, I can choose to open this in my block editor here, but I'm not actually going to. I'm going to show you that you can actually do these edits inside the project setup as well. I'm going to go OK. It's going to ask me the normal attributes information. Cool. But that's all I'm going to do here, apart from hitting save. Don't forget to hit save once creating a block. Right-click on my project again and go project setup. Now we wait for an eternity. Aha! There we go, we're back in here. Notice it jumps me back to where I was previously in my vols. Now, for those of you that were wondering, those drawing properties that I was talking about, if you look underneath general and you look at drawing properties, you can see I've got a revision that I've added and also this drawing ID. So this is actually where you were to add it in if you were trying to add in extra information, etc., per drawing sheet. And it's pretty easy to actually pull this information out once you're trying to get that information. Okay, that being said, under the drawing properties, also, by the way, if you have project-wide properties, you can also just click the project properties and then add it inside here. So either custom category and then the subcategory of rows inside it. But that would be up to you. Jumping back to our connector though, people do get sometimes a little bit confused with this. It's actually pretty easy to find once you know. So firstly, P&ID, because we're in the P&ID, we're not in the 3D isometric or ortho. You go in P&ID classes, and this is a non-engineering class. So it's like annotation, text information that we are trying to give over to somebody else. Inside there, we've got our connectors. And then inside the connector, you've got off-page connectors. And now this is the default off-page connector. So if I use my drop-down, you can see actually my prior one that I made, which we're going to be remaking. Then in my off page connector, I'm going to go add symbol. And same type of thing, I'm going to go browse to my drawing. You notice it's there where I've saved it. You can see the thumbnail. Okay, and I can see my OPC01. Add my selected block. Next, pops up all my information. Cool. Going to give it a symbol name. By the way, the symbol name, if you don't put it in and you try and hit finish, it's going to complain bitterly at you. And this one, because it's just the name that you can visibly see, it's suitable for your information, you can have spaces in that. I'm going to mention that one. The rest of it should be pretty much, if you're not creating a new class, so you're just adding a symbol in, the interesting thing about that is it will already inherit the general style details from the other the other symbols that you already pre-made or was already there. So sometimes if you are going to be customizing or changing things, instead of going into the symbol or creating a new one, try find something similar to it and edit it from there, and you're not going to have to fill in all this information manually again. You notice even my symbol scale was filled in for me. So from here, okay, cool, I'm happy. Off-page connector, it's on the correct layer, annotation, layers by layer by block is the line type, and its scale factor of 25. For this case, those are the important bits of information. And I'm going to go finish. Now, yay, okay, cool. We've got now our connector in, but as you can see, it says dummy 1 and dummy 2, which is not very useful for a off-page connector. We want to actually put some information in there. Cool. So I'm going to go now edit block. And now I can see my lovely dummy 1, dummy 2, but now let's put in some information. So I'm going to say assign format, and as soon as I click it, it's going to ask me selecting attribute definition. I'm going to select my first one, and it's like, okay, cool, well, number of subparts, 1. We're going to keep it like that. If you've done now information on the lines, this would also look familiar. Just quickly rushing this on now. I'm going to click the page setup. Going to click the drawing ID. Sorry, not drawing ID. It's going to be general and drawing number. So what this is going to do is this top line is going to look at by the sheet and pull that information across. So the general, the number, and then pull it across. Okay. And I'm going to click OK. Now, if you take a look at this, hash, open parentheses or open the bracket, drawing general, dummy, P&ID, dummy 1, etc., dummy 1. Wait, why is it on the back end? Because if you go back into it, you'll notice the delimiter, for some reason, is whatever the attribute's name was. So don't forget to take that off and go OK. Okay, another little thing that you may have noticed is, I don't know if you remember the little equal symbol. Let's jump back to this one over here. You notice the little equal symbol is not there, because by default it's referring you back to wherever you're, whatever you're currently on. So what we need to do is just double click onto the attributes. You notice the attribute definition pops up just after the parentheses. Whoops, not a plus, an equal symbol, and click OK. So now what we're telling it is that not to look at the current drawing where the connect is, but it's wherever it's coming from. Okay. This bottom one, I'm just going to do something simple, and I'm just going to click on it, and I'm going to say, okay, whatever you're currently on, the current connector, off-page connector, I'm going to say, okay, I want you to just fill in the description. So this could be a manual field that you could type out with information if you wanted. I'm going to click OK. And click OK. This gives us all that information. Oops, we're going to take the delimiter off. Cool. So this is giving us now our target information. So what we've given it is where the drawing is coming from and also the information inside it. Accept and close. There's one important thing I was going to put on there, which was the end connections. Jump back to this one. Attachment point 1 and attachment point 2. This is just so that it knows which way around it's attaching to. Okay, once we've now done this, we can then save And that basically is what we would need to do to get this all-page connector working correctly. Now, don't forget to add it to your tool palette or else you're not going to be able to use it. And click OK. Now, when I go back to my tool palette, you can see it's sitting there in my off-page connector. You notice the name off-page connector? That was that name in the symbol that we defined prior, that I said you don't have to worry about spaces in this one. If I click on it, I can then add it to an object. Oh, that's the reason why I put my... It's because I put my section right there. Of course, now it's not wanting to work nicely for me. Give me 1 second. Later. Off-page connector. There we go. That one's working. And that one's not wanting to work. So when you do get things like this, always a good idea to just close the drawing and let's relaunch it quickly. What it does then is it checks the back end and see if there's any errors that's occurred then in the database. It's still not wanting to work for me for some reason. So what this is basically doing now is it will look that when we're trying to connect to another off-page connector, and as you can see, I've got an off-page connector there. I'm going to connect to that off-page connector, and you can see that the little, the no information there was now connected to 01. Remember, we're on sheet 2 at the moment, and 01 over here, for some reason, it's not wanting to display our information. This would be having to go back in and see as to why this thing is not wanting to pull the information across correctly. Oh, to delete it and maybe put it back, it might work. It could be because I've also been poking the database quite a bit. Normally, you wouldn't be doing what I'm doing to a normal database, and you wouldn't be having this information issue. But yes, by the way, the off-page connector at the bottom here, if we went into the properties and you go with the off-page connector, where it says there in the description, you can say hello, and then this will put it in there. The reason why it broke is because I replaced that off-page connector. I'm just going to quickly reconnect it, the dummy, and you see it connects. This one is a bit of a strange one, and like I said, I have to go back because it's connecting but not putting the information through to this one, which is a bit unusual. But generally, this will work straight off the bat. Okay, so that would be like how you could then put in new items. And as I said off the bat, these off-page connectors can be a bit troublesome and they do take a bit of playing around with. Probably part of the reason why it's doing that is because I chose the center as my base. If we go on to the next part of here, which is our tagline and information. So these taglines and stuff, they're basically information that will then be pulled from the line. So you can use it to suit your own company style. And each tag, though, needs to be unique. And the main thing that needs to be unique here is this back-end number, which is this 51110 over there, as you can see. And in this case, it's going by size, spec, the service, and the actual line number on the end. You can also, by the way, add acquisition rules to grab the line number per component. And what do I mean by that is that if we were good to go into back to our first drawing, I'm going to take a look. This is the line number over there. To edit this, I can go back into my project setup. Go to my engineering items, lines, pipeline segments, and then in the pipeline segments, this is the section that actually drives it. If I go modify, you can actually see then it's looking at target object size, the target object spec, line group service, and the line group number. If you wanted to add more or less, you could, but generally what I'd say is don't modify the original one, add a new one in to modify. I'm going to click new here, and you'll notice that because I had that one selected, it's going to be copy of. So I'm just going to say this is MGFX pipeline tag, And all I'm going to do over here, this is just text, by the way. It's good to kind of give a name over there because then people can understand what's going on here. So in here, I'm just going to say, okay, I'm just going to say it's the size and line number that I'm going to want to show, just for simplicity's sake. But because we're only filling in 2 fields here, we only need to give 2 subparts. So over here, as you can see, the one's already target object size. The way you get that, by the way, is you click this little icon. So what these little icons are, this is the object icon, the thing that you're currently clicking on, the page icon or the sheet icon, the sheet that you're currently working on, or otherwise, like I use the equal sign, you could reference to something that's referencing it. You could also do your complete project throughout anything that's throughout the project. Remember in the project settings that I showed you that you could add something there. And this over here basically defines the information. So if I were to click on that, it tells you how this information is going to be represented. Is it only going to be text? Is it only going to be forced to numbers? Freestyle means you can also basically you can put anything in there, but normally we use it for information that is automatically pulling through. You'll notice it'll put information on the back. So for target object size, firstly, this is a little tick box. You want to make sure that's ticked, and that will look exactly at that object. And at the moment, it's set to pipeline segments and set to size, because that is exactly what we're looking at. We're only interested in that line at the moment there. And click OK. We're not interested in the spec over here. We're actually interested in the line number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the pick again. But now it's not actually the pipeline segment I'm interested in. I'm going to tick that off. We'll just wait a second. It can take a little while for this to dig through the database. We are actually interested in the pipeline group and line number. And click OK. So it's pipeline group, line number, and click OK. Now that I've got that information in, people will stop here and think that, oh, this is all I need to do. There's one more important thing. Because we've created a new line number, we have to go all the way down here to the bottom of the properties and then say, hey, wait a second, don't use a tag format. Use the MGFX pipeline format over there. And go OK. Now what happens is that it won't update the ones already in. But if I were to retag, sign tag, as I retag, you notice now I've got size 80, pipeline group number 512. I could then change that to whatever I want. Place the annotation afterwards, and then that would place it on. So this would be a basic way as to how you can go and then customize your tags to suit. As you can see, I did a very simple one there. I just literally added in a size and then the number. But the original one you could see was a far more complicated, and it had the line number, the actual spec, the service, and also the rest of the number as well with it. Okay, that being said though, is that something I was asked prior, which is actually quite interesting, is, okay, it's cool, but now you've given us all this information, but like let's say I've got a valve for an instance, and how can I tell what valve is sitting where? Because sometimes it's useful information. So what we can do here as well is we can use these line numbers to our advantage in our project setup. Just wait for an eternity for it to launch. There we go. In our inline assets, let's say in our valves, we can add in something that can help us determine as to where something is, or show people where certain valves are on certain lines, or at least show what line is on what, what valve is on what line. And what I'm going to show you here is a pretty cool little feature called the acquisition rule. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at, it's going to say this line, let's say valve 100. Valve 100 is going to look at whatever line it's sitting on and then report that back inside the data manager. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go add over here my properties, and I'm going to say, okay, cool, so what are we doing? So I'm going to say on line number, or this could be whatever you want. You can also, like I said, have spaces in display name. But the golden rule here is make sure acquisition is ticked. And go OK. This then brings up the data sources. So we can say, okay, what is it going to use to grab the information? If you click pipeline segments and then tag, it will then look at the pipeline segment tag and then pull that information through. I'm going to click OK. And if you look over here, you can see our new one was created. There's the name of it. It's done via acquisition rule. Use the drop down, you can change on to certain things, but I'm not going to get into that for now. But the main important one over here is you want to also then make sure it's visible. Because now when we click OK, just waiting for it to finish loading. And if we come back over here, now if I were to drop a new valve in, now sadly this only works for new valves, that when I drop it in, let's save, and then go back and if I open up my data manager and it's my hand valves, I'm going to go all the way to the right because the new one will always be on the right. If I've got put in a new valve, it will then automatically show me what actual line number it is currently sitting on. So on line number 1000. If I were to put on one of the other ones, it would then report as to where it is. So in other words, if I were to track one of the other lines, it will report that it's there. I hope it reports properly there because it's not not showing information. There we go. It's reporting that line number information there. That was the valve that I just put on. So this becomes very handy because now we've assigned the line number, we've assigned the information there, and then also having our valves showing us what line it's actually currently sitting on populated, which can be very useful for now double checking and populating information. Okay guys, so now I'm starting to wrap things up. Some tips and tricks and stuff. I've gone through a lot of them already and some information, but seriously, try to keep things standard. It's going to solve a lot of your issues down the line. It's going to make your lives a lot easier. Try and convince people to try and keep things standard, or else you're going to be drastically increasing your implementation time. Okay, make sure to get as many people involved with your setup right in the beginning, or else you're going to be starting to make something, and then you're going to have one person saying, oh, no, it needs to be done this way. Another person going, no, we need to do it this way. And it's just going to be a backwards and forwards like a tennis match. Make sure, what I do generally at the start of a project and stuff, I try and get as many people involved right in the beginning and say, okay, what do we need to do? What do we have to have implemented, etc., etc. This is the information. Cool. Once everybody's done, signed off, take it from there because it's going to save you a lot. So, yeah. As you can see, a lot of this is to try and make your lives a bit easier and faster. Okay, use attachment points and encodes. These can affect things like your end connections. What I meant by that is that if I select on something like a valve, right, and I right-click, I can say set end connection, socketed, etc. I think I picked the wrong one there because the socket would won't really show anything. Well, it's not showing it in this specific one. Let's try this one. Set end connection, socketed. There we go, that one showed. So those are your end connections. However, if you did not have that specified, so I'm going to see if I can cheat in this one, and I'm just going to delete the encodes off. This may work, it may not work. I'm just doing it the quick way. I'm going to save the P&ID block. By the way, interesting thing to note about plants is that every one of these blocks is an instance. It's one of the reasons why unfortunately dynamic blocks don't work, because dynamic blocks use similar systems. So yeah, unfortunately you can't have your cake and eat it too in this case. You notice because I edited this one's block, none of the other blocks were edited with it, or this one specifically. Now though, if I try and right click on this, it doesn't give me the option like this one to set the end connection. So those little end connection, the end codes on the back end are very important because that allows you to do certain things like setting end connections. So be aware, when possible, try and use attachment points and the end codes. With things like tanks and that, it's not as important. You can even get away with not using attachment points at all. But when possible, try and use both. Okay, be aware of your annotation and block scales. As you saw, I was very specific in saying as to what my sizes and my scalings were. If you get it wrong firsthand, no worries, just go back, rescale it, and then work with it from there. It's just, these can be the bane of your existence in trying to get things scaled correctly. And this actually ties back to trying to keep things as standard as possible. Because when you're trying to start adding custom information in, you're going to start really running into walls there. It's just going to increase your time drastically. Okay, guys, so some of our observations. Plant P&ID is an amazing program. It can really increase your speed of making P&IDs. Anybody who's used base AutoCAD for P&IDs that's touched Plant P&ID that's correctly set up will never go back to doing them in normal AutoCAD, because just by the very fact of being able to click on just like grabbing on a valve, being able to drag it from one line, like maybe a horizontal line or a vertical line, to another horizontal or vertical line, and having it flip, heal the line, break the other line, and put it in itself incorrectly all by its own without us having to interfere, is an amazing thing. And that's just like per one item that really saves us in the long run. And then when you start adding in things like what you can do and what you can add into the back end for information, all the information you can put in and then draw out to the database is phenomenal. And then couple this with the next sections I'm going to go on to, and one of my others is going to be in the 3D and how we can even lever that further. Because once you do the 3D, you can then also automatically drop off your ISO files, etc. There is a lot more that goes into it, but yeah, that's basically it from my side. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Do I have any questions? Anything that I've gone on with? Please, there is a chat feature on the right-hand side in that little flyout. If you're looking at the bottom, there should be something called chat. Otherwise, there is, it looks like two little speech bubbles on the top right. If you click that, if you can put anything in chat. I've got a few minutes to go, so please feel free to ask any questions. Or was it a case of, oh my goodness, he's been going on for so long now and he hasn't stopped? Okay, guys, just to let you know, this is Micrographics, of course. I'm actually from the Durban branch, so the one down here at the bottom. And yeah, if you're wanting to get hold of us, please drop us an email, etc. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly jump all the way quickly at the back. Jump back there. So this is my information. Quinn Kennedy, Quinn at mgfx.co.za, application engineer, part-time trying to take over the world. If you've got any queries, anything you want to know, please feel free, drop me an email. Always around to answer something. I don't get back to you straight away. I do apologize. I do a lot of running around and a lot of implementations for people, but I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, I don't see any queries coming across yet. Nobody want to ask anything? Cool. Thank you, Brian. Much appreciated. Okay, like I said, if you guys do have any queries, please feel free to give me a shout. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much for joining me. Have an epic day. Cheerio. Bye.